Welcome back to Product Therapy. Today I'm joined once again by SVPG founder and my good friend Marty Cagan. In this episode, we're unpacking one of the most consequential but yet misunderstood levers in product organizations, team topology. Whether you're scaling from one team to 5 or navigating dozens of interdependent teams, how you break down work and structure your product teams will either make or inhibit everything you're trying to do. We'll explore what good topology looks like, why it's more than just your org charts, and how great leaders use team structure to unlock autonomy, clarity, and customer impact. Marty, as always, welcome back.
Thanks very much, Christian. Good to be here.
Well, let's dive in. And I want to actually start with a definition because this word team topology was not always very common in our industry as a way to describe what we mean here. Maybe why the name and what does team topology mean?
Yeah, well, credit where it's due. For years, the industry, including us, never had a name for this. Usually, we just described it as the different factors in structuring product teams. So not really a name, more of a description. But then there was a new book that came out by a couple guys that came from the DevOps side called Team Topologies. I knew one of the authors and I read the book and liked the book and I reached out and said, where did you get this name? Because I love it and we need it as an industry. And he said, well, they tried it at an industry conference. They gave a talk. People seemed to really resonate. And I said, well, I'd love to start using it and just credit you guys. And they were fine with that. They loved it. So that's where it came from. And I do recommend to people who want to drill deeper on this topic of team topologies to read their book. I thought it's a very good book and a lot of people have read it. The thing that is important to understand is that we're really coming at team topologies from the opposite angles. You and I, we're coming at it from really the top down, the organizational needs, the goals of the company, how do you deliver on a product vision? They're coming at team topology actually from the bottom up. They are coming from a DevOps perspective where what we're looking at actually is empowered product teams. And why? Because we're all about outcomes. They're looking at it from a flow perspective. How do you get as much pushed live as possible? Now, of course, flow or velocity of delivery and outcomes are not unrelated, but they're not the same thing. The point is, in the book, they talk more about optimizing a team topology for throughput, and we talk about optimizing a team topology for outcomes. They're similar and complementary enough that I think it's very good for people to understand both perspectives, but that's where the name came from. The biggest thing that most people get confused about, people want to conflate team topologies with org structure because they think that's what we're talking about. They kind of assume we're talking about org structure, but we're actually not talking about org structure. You can have basically any org structure with any team topology. What we're really talking about in team topology is who are the people on each product team and what is each product team responsible for? Org structure says, what are the reporting relationships between the people in your organization? So, for example, the most common org structure out there, it is not the only one, this is just by far the most common, is called the functional org structure model. All that means is that if you're an engineer, you report to an engineering manager. If you're a designer, you report to a design manager. Same with all the roles. That's a functional org chart. It typically goes up if it's a small company to the CEO or a medium, or if it's a large company to a general manager. But if you're an engineering manager, let's say you've got 15 engineers you're responsible for. They're probably on 3, 4, 5 different product teams, and they might move product teams, or you might not be their manager next year, and somebody else may be their manager next year. So org chart and org structure is different than team topology. Now, they are related. For example, it's not that unusual that, and this is a little old I'm describing, I think things are getting better on this, but it's still very common that, say, front-end engineers, every product team might have 1 or 2 front-end engineers. All the front-end engineers might report to a front-end engineering manager who reports to the CTO. But all the different kinds of back-end engineers, they report to different engineering managers. So There's a relationship there, but it's really not a hardline relationship, if that makes sense.
People easily run to the definition of an org structure. Is that what we're talking about here? Org structure is really thinking about reporting relationships. Team topology is thinking about how do we break down and assign work? What is each team responsible for? Who is on each team? And you called out something very important in terms of it can be optimized in different ways. In Empower teams, we're trying to optimize it for outcomes. It could also be optimized for velocity or throughput. But the whole kind of idea here is you're thinking to yourself, I have some set of problems I want to solve. How do I break down and assign some ownership? And how do I break down the work and who is working on what? And that's kind of what you're calling team topology. This is not about reporting structure or lines. It's the units of work or the team solving a problem. Okay, you've kind of called out for empower teams. The idea is that you want to optimize for outcomes. What does that look like? And maybe if you were differentiating that from optimizing for velocity and throughput, what would you see as the core differences in team topology?
Well, you're kind of getting at why team topology is so hard to do. And that's because you can optimize for so many different things. They're all good things. People would say, is velocity good? Absolutely. But how about alignment with the customers? That's good. I love alignment with the customers. How about alignment with the architecture? Anybody who's ever built anything knows that you either fight the architecture or you roll with the architecture. And it's generally not a good idea to fight the architecture. So we would love to align with the architecture. How about aligning with the business units and your stakeholders? That's a lot easier. You can build long-term relationships. You can really get on the same page. All of these things are good, but they're all trade-offs against each other. Maybe a very clear common example that sounds so good but rarely works out well. I mean, you heard me say we really want to optimize for outcomes. Well, one way to do that is say, for every major outcome we care about, we're going to have one product team that owns that outcome. Sounds so easy. And the obvious example of this is growth team. But there's lots of them. There's a retention team a lot of times. There's a lot of things that are so appealing to align with an outcome like that, a major KPI. However, when you look at the trade-offs involved in a team aligned to a specific outcome, what usually means is all the teams are stepping on each other and they have dependencies all over the place. And there's another big factor that I haven't even mentioned yet that actually in the book, Team Topology, they do a very good job at explaining this. And it's the concept of cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to, it's usually used in terms of the engineers, but honestly, it applies to all of us. It applies to me for sure. I deal with this all the time. Cognitive load is how much can you really fit in your head at one time when you're working on a specific problem. Some of the things we build are so complicated. Thousands of business rules, hundreds or thousands of use cases. I mean, these huge load. And from an engineer's perspective, millions of lines of code, lots of different layers of the tech stack, lots of different technologies, each with their own APIs and SDKs for using them. And it's really easy to just get lost in the details. Too many things in our heads. And, people don't talk about cognitive load as much as they should because it's a squishy thing and everybody's a little different. And, we have other things going on in our lives that probably affect our cognitive load. For me, age, whatever it is. But the fact is, we have to factor that in too. And so what we're doing is we're balancing all of these things, plus more. Another big one I didn't mention is teams are collections of people and technologies and data, right? And so there's a chemistry. I think we need a better word for it. Chemistry sounds romantic and it's not. There's the sets of people that just love working together. And there's other people that hate working together. And, some of that is, some people, could use a little better behaviors at times and all that. But other times they just don't gel together well and they don't trust each other and all those things. And what we really want to do is we want teams that have, the term is psychological safety, but they trust each other. They know each other. They can be very different. They can be very, like you and I, Christian, we come from completely different worlds, but I trust you with my life. It doesn't matter where we come from. What matters is, do you have that kind of relationship with the people on your team?
This is very important. You're describing this balancing act of a lot of things. You're not just thinking about alignment, whether it's with the customer or with the business or with stakeholders or technology or data. You're talking about cognitive load. You're talking about relationships, all of these patterns. Maybe one way I want to try to help people understand team topology is by probably the symptoms or indications that you have a topology problem. Right? Like, how would I come into a company, or how would you discern that something the company is dealing with is related to topology? What are some of these examples?
The good news is this is the easy part. Fixing it is the hard part. But this is the easy part once you know what to look for. And usually you could tell, and I'm not exaggerating, in just a few minutes of talking to the people on the teams. One is just they have too many dependencies. And you don't have to search much for that. Everybody on the team will tell you that. The engineers will complain that if I was in control of this place, I could have this out in a day. The truth is, though, we depend on 10 other product teams, and we have to go through their product managers and their project managers and their engineers. And they have their own dependencies, but by the time they can get to our stuff, it takes forever. And we have all this legacy stuff and all this tech debt stuff. And we have some things that nobody even works here knows how to maintain anymore. So we have all of these things. What I'm really describing is the symptom of lack of autonomy. And autonomy is very related to empowerment, but it's not the same. Empowerment means the team is responsible for coming up with the right solution. They are. Autonomy means they don't have any of these dependencies. They could just get to work and build the solution. One of the things I just love about a startup is, you basically have 100% autonomy. The startup is typically a product team. You've got no obstacles in your way. You have no legacy. You just go so fast. But of course, once you get bigger, you're solving harder problems and you have divided and conquered, into different areas. And so now you have some dependencies. Now we have better ways, some good ways and some not so good ways of managing those dependencies. But that's the symptom. The most common symptom you'll see is that teams complain of being dependent on too many other places to get anything done. So that's one. Another is what we were just starting to talk about is if the team doesn't trust each other, the team doesn't like each other, if the team isn't talking with each other. This is always hard, just to be clear, but one of the challenges with remote work is this is even harder because it's both harder to build that trust and easier to lose it. So you have to work harder to build it and maintain it. But that's another really clear symptom. Usually all I have to do is sit in on Zoom on one team meeting and you can see if this team has good chemistry or not. You'll often see certain people who won't say a word because every time they do, they're shut down. You'll see other people that are just like, just tell me whatever you want on this. I don't want to deal with it. You'll see these symptoms. And these are symptoms of a team that doesn't have that dynamic that we're really looking to enable. There can be lots of other things we're seeing too, that contribute. This is actually where team topology starts to get related to org structure because org structure is how we coach the people. Because the reason we care about org structure is that's who you work for and that's who is normally coaching you. And so when I find, let's say, a designer who is really frustrated and I'm like, well, where's your manager? Why aren't they coaching you with this? Why aren't they helping you learn techniques to deal with this? Or when necessary, talking to a manager of maybe a problematic person about what to do. Managers play a big role. They're just not on the team. They're coaching the people on the team. Another symptom, and this is increasingly common, by the way, people feel like they're just a small cog in a giant wheel. So they feel like all they do is a stupid little step in a checkout flow. They're like, I can't even take responsibility for the whole checkout. All I do is handle the last step or the recommendation or whatever. And so they feel very small in the organization. And the result of that is that they don't feel like they can really make the impact they need. They want to own more. I am a big fan of giving teams more scope of responsibility rather than less scope of responsibility.
I'm hearing the big three. of you may have a topology problem if you have too many dependencies. You may have a topology problem if you have this unhealthy team friction, lack of chemistry or trust or psychological safety in a team. You may have a topology problem if people feel small or insignificant or don't feel that they have enough to make an impact. And these are very, very different dynamics. I mean, we're talking about some significant things that affect architecture, how you've broken up legacy systems or work, to just human dynamics of people working well together. Now, Marty, this is owned by who? Who owns team topology? Who owns this work of breaking down and structuring teams in an organization?
Well, this is one of the reasons why it's hard, is because unlike most things where we have a clear owner, like the CTO owns the architecture, the CPO owns the product vision and product strategy. I mean, those are pretty clear. Now, of course, each of them get a lot of help and all that, but there is a clear owner. Team topology is sort of the exception, because team topology, as we've sort of already been laying out, is just hundreds of trade-offs. And because of that, the two people that own team topology together are the head of product and the head of engineering. And they really have to do it together, because I've seen so many times what happens when one or the other does it. Basically, they're just optimizing for their primary interest, which is understandable. And the result, though, is a mess because of the consequences on all the other areas. So it really is a give and take, where they are talking about, well, there's certain things that are just so dominated by the architecture that if we don't organize teams this way, they are going to have a nightmare. And so you say, all right, for these teams, it's going to be driven primarily by the architecture and therefore the skills of the people and the engineers on the team, depending on the stack. And then other ones are going to be, you know what, this is not so driven by the architecture. Let's focus on aligning with the customers for that one. And so those might align better with the business side or the customer side. So the truth is the two are doing this together. We could go on for days. There are so many different factors. But some people listening might be wondering, because they're not only people solutions to these, but there's also technology solutions to these and architectural solutions. One of the most common big improvements to team topology and ways to get things much better are platform teams. And that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because a platform is by definition a dependency. And we started by saying too many dependencies, but platform teams are designed to minimize dependencies, not eliminate dependencies. And I can tell you it's pretty much impossible to eliminate dependencies, but you can minimize them. And so a lot of times the head of technology will work with the head of product and they'll say, we need a platform strategy here. It's going to enable all of the teams to go much faster. It's an investment, but here's why. Just like we make an investment in tech debt, we make an investment in architecture. That's one of the tools in our toolbox to make better team topologies.
Marty, it prompted a thought. Does answering the question, what is a product in our organization, kind of affect this team topology exercise? Who is doing that definition of like, we are going to call this a product or a product area? Because this is almost like, is this the first straight-off discussion between the head of product and the head of engineering?
You sure you want to ask this question, huh? Because this is a can of worms for sure. There are more than a few companies that I've gone into that had a disaster of a team topology just because they started with that question. They said, well, what is a product for us? And they ended up with some very surface level definition of that. And so then they tried to create teams for each of those because they wanted empowered ownership of those teams. Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. None of these teams integrate with each other. They're not what anybody wanted. So the root of that question is like, what's a product? And the truth is, when I started my career, that was a very easy question, because back then it was very common for companies to have a large portfolio of small products. Literally, there would be thousands. There would be a catalog, a printed catalog. Hewlett-Packard had a printed catalog with thousands of products, and every one of those products had a SKU, and each of those SKUs mapped to typically a product team. Sometimes one product team had multiple SKUs even. Today, it's complete opposite. Today, the most common situation is that the company is a SaaS company of some sort. It might be consumer. It's usually business into SaaS. It's just one product, basically, but it has 50 product teams that all own a piece of that product. And of course, it gets even messier because products can be services, products can be technology, products can be all kinds of things. Also, products don't have to be something your customer orders. They can be something that powers the customer experience behind the scenes. So I try to get people not to focus and not to get lost in that rabbit hole of what's a product, because what we really think is we provide a set of services to our customers. Those services are often, if not always, powered by technology. And what we are talking about is dividing up the work to power those customer experiences. Full stop.
Okay, so you're coming into a company and you want to coach them on topology or how they organize or break down work. Where do you start?
My rule is I only start when I have the head of technology/engineering and the head of product in a room together. We could do this on a whiteboard, Miro board, but usually it's in their office with a whiteboard because I need them. They're the ones that have the knowledge in their heads. And then we start with some basic things because we don't have infinite money, right? Usually I say, well, how many engineers do you have? How many designers do you have? How many product managers do you have? And then for the engineers especially, they're usually grouped into different skill sets, rough skill sets. Some of them are very specialized. A lot of them can do lots of different things. And so we'll start to get an understanding of what's the raw material that we have to work with to construct our teams. That's one side of things. Often a lot of that comes from the engineering leader. Then I'll go to the product leader and say, we need the product vision because the product strategy and the product teams are there to deliver on a product vision. So what's the product vision? Sometimes they don't even have a product vision yet, and we need to talk about why this is important. Like, how can the engineering leader provide an architecture if they don't know the product vision? All they can do is sort of yesterday's stuff. They can't do tomorrow's stuff. So these are sort of the raw materials, the inputs, and then we start looking at what are the different dynamics in this company. So one of the most memorable for me was very early eBay. Pierre Omijar was the co-founder, and there was basically 4 product teams: a buyer team, a seller team, a search team, and a trust and safety team. And pretty simple, small, and that's not unusual for a marketplace-like product. Early Airbnb, early Uber, early Etsy, they're all the same basic structure. So it makes sense. But then as you grow, each of those teams kind of becomes a department, whatever you want to call it. It becomes a group of teams. Spotify used to call it a tribe. Yeah, and it can grow. So the idea of team topology is, of course, they can scale arbitrarily, but the more you do this, the more important actually the topology is, because this is another thing we haven't said yet, Christian, that's really important. It can be very tempting to split one team into multiple teams, usually when there's too much work or too many people. It does sound appealing to split, but splitting teams has a obvious fixed cost. You typically need a new designer, you need a new product manager, you need a new tech lead. You're going from one of these to 2 of these, but it also has a very big hidden cost. Because keeping all these teams headed in the same direction and still providing each of them meaningful work when you've just split a team into 2 becomes harder and harder. And so I tell these leaders that we would rather have a smaller number of teams that feel real ownership and real ability to make an impact than a larger number of teams that feel like they're small, unable to impact, too many dependencies. And so at some point you run up against some real walls of limitations, like, this is where the concept of a 2-pizza team comes from. Once you have too many people, that's usually about 10 to 12 engineers, a designer, and a product manager. That's too many people to feed with 2 pizzas. And practically speaking, what that really means is that a product manager and designer cannot keep up with more than about 10 to 12 engineers. They cannot generate enough good backlog items so that those engineers are not just building garbage. And so at some point, you have to look at changing that calculus. The most common way people do that is they say, all right, at this point, we probably need it to be 2 teams. But there are other ways of doing it too. Like a platform team can dramatically improve the efficiency of that team In fact, you're probably able to take a lot of the services those engineers are building, put it in the platform, and then the team can actually stay or even grow still. And the cognitive load is good. These are all these benefits we were talking about before.
Okay, I want to walk through this again. I kind of want to make sure I know what the deal breakers are in this path to creating a good team topology. One, you say, I've got to have the head of engineering and the head of product together. If they are not together, this is not going to work. So first step, can we pull them together to work on this? Second, you're doing some form of a resource check. Kind of what are the raw materials we have to kind of get a sense, because we don't have unlimited resources. I need to know what we have. Now, as you're doing that check, Marty, are you also checking for ratios? Do they matter? Like if I've got 10 product managers, 1 designer for customer-facing teams, do we still keep going? Do we focus on staffing?
That's an example of a whole. And that's one of the reasons we're looking for what do we have to work with, that balance. That's a pretty common one. They don't have enough designers. Now, again, there's architectural solutions for that. Let's say you've got native mobile apps, and you've got at least 2 probably, and you like to have 2 designers, but let's say you just have 1. If you have a good foundation, either a platform services for those mobile apps or one of the frameworks for mobile apps, you'd probably be able to get away with 1 designer because it's a thinner layer. They're able to design an experience with a richer set of building blocks. So there are other ways of making it work, but fundamentally, we're often limited by the tech leads, the designers, and product managers. Those are the ones that we really need to make sure we have. You know, sometimes, let's just play this out. The company has a product vision and we can go to a whiteboard and maybe we come back and we need 15 product teams. But we look at the people we have and we've got enough to staff maybe 5. You've got to reconcile that. Now, you could go to your CEO and say, oh, we have to triple the organization. I've seen companies that have done that because to do what the company needs to do, you got to have this massive hiring spree. You might have been involved in a couple of those companies. In other cases, it's like, no, we've got enough staff for 5 teams. So now what we have to do is sort of reconcile our strategy with 5 teams. We're not going to be able to do as much in a year probably, but the truth is 5 teams can do a lot. Actually, there's a lot of things that are easier and faster when you have 5 teams versus 15 teams. So normally when you go into the team topology exercise, it's not about, oh, how much money do you need? It's about how to make the best use of the people you have so that you get the most out of that investment.
Okay, this is very helpful. I'm kind of playing it in my head. One of the things I used to do when I coached teams early on team topology is when I'm doing the vision check, all right, let's talk about the vision. I'm having the engineering leader think about what architecture, what investments in technology will we need to support the vision. I typically say, like, look, let's do a blank slate exercise. You know, we have unlimited funds. We are a startup. We are a lean machine. Map out how you break out work to go accomplish this vision. It's often very different from how the company is structured today, but it kind of gives them a glimpse because when they do that exercise, they are optimizing for speed, efficiency, they are taking out dependencies. And I'm kind of saying, okay, let's look at our current layout or topology today and look at what those gaps are in terms of how you're addressing it, because most people tend to design their topology based on their historical context than their strategic context, kind of where they are than where they are going. But you call that one piece as the last piece here, which is the dynamics, maybe the politics, the natural growth. I have a group of teams now. I have a bigger need. Maybe a good example that I want to use to hear your thoughts on this is kind of that trade-off choice. Let's use a common one happening now, AI, okay? As an organization, do I create an AI team? Or do I take AI and embed it in every team? And maybe some of that is a strategic or part of strategy, but where does that kind of decision fit?
No, that's a perfect one. The model, we of course saw all this play out with mobile too, a decade ago or so. So there is a pattern and the same thing is happening right now. And it's totally understandable and logical. It's maybe not ideal, but it makes sense. First of all, they need to make sure AI has got a real purpose here. And they're not just, playing around. And that speaks to product vision and product strategy. But let's assume, this company has real opportunities. And this is true for so many companies. And the sooner we can get all of our teams up to speed on AI technology, the better. The problem is it takes time. Some people learn much faster than others. A lot of the technology is a moving target right now. The truth is, just like with mobile, what most teams are doing, they create sort of a pioneering team, right? They are out there exploring, right on the tip of the arrow, you could say, team. They are doing our first things maybe with AI. Other teams are super interested. They want to start doing it too, but they haven't had the chance to spend the time to maybe take some training courses in the technologies and evals and whatever they're doing. And so the company has basically got one or a small number of teams that is figuring that out while they simultaneously work on, and this is what the engineering leaders are doing and product leaders and design leaders, is how do we get our people trained? If there are new people we need to recruit into the company, how will we get them? If there's coaching we need to provide them, we need to start learning those things. This is what they're doing. I know this is being recorded well before it will go live, but literally yesterday, Google had some very good financial announcements. And it was already several years ago, Google decided to move from mobile first to AI first. And they've been working on embedding this technology across the company for years. It's now showing results, but it took a while. And this is a good company that tries to stay ahead of these things, but it takes a while. And now there are many actually really good examples. There are also, and most people don't even see them, lots of experiments that go nowhere, but they learn.
Marty, where does the competencies or talent assessment fit in all of this? At what point, even as I'm carving out work and I'm like, I need a team for this, you're like, boy, but I don't have a good person, or you're going almost down to the weeds of putting a name in a box and evaluating that fit or that chemistry with somebody else.
That's part of team topology. It really is. And in fact, on that whiteboard with those people, we're starting to put names because that matters. Like we said, there's really two big things. One is skills. For example, some of the coolest AI stuff right now needs like a tech lead or a product manager with good machine learning background, and not all the people have that background. So it's a small subset of names that are candidates for that. And then we're looking at what we talked about earlier. Well, will these people really work together effectively? Do we think there's any reason they might not? So we're looking at that dynamic as well. And we're making sure we have good people to coach them. And this gets back to the org structure. But yes, that's what we're doing. And our goal with a team topology is not just a theoretical team topology, but an actual one that shows at least the product manager, when a designer is needed, the designer, and especially that engineering tech lead, which is increasingly for AI products, that is the AI lead.
Okay, so we've gotten through all of this work. We now have a team topology. Maybe say a little about rolling this out, because many companies struggle when they heavily emphasize reorg with this kind of reorg fatigue and, oh my goodness, we're going to change again, which sometimes is maybe a consequence of not doing a good job in any of the things you just described. How do I roll this out effectively, communicate this or coach this to make sure it's understood? Or are there tips there?
There is, for sure, a few factors to consider. Remember, most of the company won't view this as a reorg because the people all report to the same people typically. And in fact, most of the company, they don't know the structure of a product team. They don't know. All they see is the stuff that ships and things. They don't know that it was actually 4 teams that worked together on it. They don't know. And why should they? That's sausage making, right? So they don't know that. But within the product and technology organization, we know that. And in fact, this is important to say. If you think about what we've talked about so far, the dynamics, the members of the team, the chemistry of the team, the skills of the team, getting this right is a really important thing. And when you do get it working well, you don't want to mess with it. So we try very hard to keep teams stable. It's referred to as durable teams. So the last thing we want to do is get this team topology, get it working really well, and then some excited manager somewhere says, oh, this week we need more people over here, so we're going to move people from this team to this team. That's like the worst thing you can do, right? That is breaking that durable team. What does that really mean? It means that these people that have built this knowledge together and this relationships together is like all thrown up in the air, and now we'll see where it comes down. So we don't want to take lightly the impact of changing the team topology, in particular, the members of the teams, the people on those teams. Now, It's not unusual to add an engineer to a team, or if they do less work than they need, to move an engineer. Not unusual, but at least try to keep the structure, the muscles of that team, especially the product manager, designer, and tech lead, as stable as you can. It's also important in your scenario where you're moving from an old to a new, you probably got a lot of existing commitments, and you can't just go to your customers and say, we need a mulligan, right? Not so easy to do. So it's not unusual that one or more teams are, and I'm being very blunt here, but sort of held back to take care of those commitments so that we can take care of those customers and move forward. If you say, well, we have commitments, you'll always have commitments. So you don't want to sort of wait for something that never happens. And yes, that does mean that the people who are on those older teams might be not thrilled about that. Some of them actually are fine with that, but most people, they would rather work on the new stuff. And so this is where the leaders need to talk and really make clear how important it is and that they'll be sufficiently thanked.
That's a sensitive one, Marty. So like you think about sometimes you do an alignment topology by outcome or something or investment level, and there's a team called the growth team, which I'm always like, I'm sensitive to. Are you saying everybody else is not growing? But then you might have a team that is called the sunset team, and they're like to kill an old legacy product. And they're thinking to themselves, so what happens to my job or my career at the end of this? And how did I pick the short straw to be on the sunset team or the non-growth team?
The euphemism is CPE, current product engineering. That sounds way cooler. But, most of the engineers figure that out, so they understand nobody's fooled on this. But for example, I've been in that situation where I've been on those teams, but more especially I've been the manager of people on those teams. And I've said, look, here's the situation, and we have these commitments and they're a big deal. I need strong people that can deliver on this. And I appreciate that it's not the most desirable thing. I want you to know I'm not going to forget this. Sometimes we talk about bonuses. Sometimes I've given vacations after these. They're often called high integrity commitments, of course, as you know, these promises to customers, and they are considered very, very important. And that could be done by a current product engineering team or any team. You want to make sure you reward and recognize the people that are delivering on those promises. So it's not that hard to take care of those people. And I think it starts by being very open and upfront about why and what's going on. And the fact that they're doing this is what is enabling the company to move forward into this new vision. And it's not a long-term thing, but once they're there, we're going to talk about a really desirable spot for them to move into.
And the test of your topology, when you've done all of this work, you've gotten it set, you kind of go back to the symptoms of not having a good topology. You're saying, I know I have a good topology when it's optimized maybe in our world for empowerment, meaning there's some good sense of autonomy. We're reducing dependencies in getting things done. There's some good sense of ownership. There's maybe some, how you're aligning, but you're starting to see the symptoms of good chemistry, good dynamics within teams. That's why you want them to stick together. That also obviously affects delivery.
Mostly it's outcomes. When teams start consistently hitting outcomes, believe me, the whole company knows that and recognizes that. And that's when organizations feel very good. I've never met an organization that was actually satisfied, right? It's like, this is great. Can we go faster now? Or this is great. Can we do twice as many things? I mean, it's like, so companies are always trying to do more. The truth is the whole discussion has changed dramatically.
Yeah. This is not a one-time thing. Leaders are always looking, even while you have stable teams, because people leave, you might have to move on a low performer or bring in some new people. And every time you bring somebody into a team, it's a change. It's a change in the dynamic, in the chemistry, in the trust. And so to answer two questions here, how often am I looking at my team topology? And, what am I looking to indicate I might need to make another bigger change or drastic change?
Like I said, our goal is to really have a stable team topology. That doesn't mean that people don't get promoted or anything like that, but it does mean that they are largely stable, durable teams. At a minimum, I encourage the head of product and head of technology to review the team topology every year. They're mostly asking themselves, is this still the right topology to deliver on our vision? Maybe some of those older products have been sunsetted now, and so we don't need this, which is great because now we could put those people on really critical product teams and start giving them something more satisfying probably to work on than those older things. We love that. They love that. We are looking at the size of the backlogs. Because when a backlog gets too big, it's usually because there are not enough engineers on that team. It might be because there's real tech debt they're struggling with or something like that. But usually it's about the balance between the product manager, designer, and the set of engineers. If the backlog is really big, the engineers are struggling to keep up. If the backlog is too small, it basically runs dry, we say, then the product manager and designer are not able to keep up with the engineers. That might be that there's too many engineers given the size of the kind of work they're trying to do. These are the things we're looking at. But I would say the biggest stuff is none of this. The biggest stuff is that life happens and somebody moves away or somebody gets this massive promotion or our company does an acquisition or there's all those kinds of things. And those probably account for the largest percentage of changes to a topology.
You know, one of the things I get from large enterprises, big companies are often like, you don't understand. We've got a tremendous amount of legacy systems and tech debt. We have a lot of bureaucracy and regulation in our industry. And that's why we have to have these unique, special, multiple teams doing the same thing. A political team that looks out and a regulatory action team. And, you know, how do you respond to a big company that talks about complexity in process and bureaucracy? How do you coach them on optimizing in this manner?
Honestly, most of those concerns are the same at any kind of size company. They don't know what alternatives look like. And what I usually do, no matter what their size, is I point them at alternatives. And of course, I always laugh when they tell me we're big and we're not a little Silicon Valley startup. Oh, you mean you're like bigger than Apple? Bigger than Amazon? Bigger than Netflix? Oh, no. I'm like, well, do you think they don't do really complicated products that have incredible constraints? The funny thing is they're usually a small fraction of those companies, actually. They're not nearly as big as they think. And of course, this is what fuels the industry, that you have a lot of companies that lose their mojo, they lose their ability to innovate, customers migrate to companies that serve them better. It's a constant machine that we have going in the world, and that's how it works.
Last question here, Marty. One of the things that in many companies I see a lot is like duplication of effort, like two teams working on the same thing, wasted work or effort in some areas. You know, you kind of have some ownership around something, but it's not mapped to an outcome. And these dependency traps in many cycles. If a company is at that current stage where this is that big symptom, does this reset all of that? Or are there things you're doing in the change management or coaching that also need to be in place to support topology? Because I'm kind of sensing that maybe just changing topology may not be enough.
It's not.
In some of these.
It's not.
Yeah.
Remember, the topology is a function of the vision and the strategy. I want to be careful because there are both good and bad reasons we might have redundancy. Bad reason, which is what I think you're talking about. In big companies, I've seen this, I don't know how many times, they might complain to me that they have 4 different product teams all doing authentication. And they know that. The problem is they have 4 different applications that have inherited these things and they all do it differently, but their poor customers are really going, come on, I have single sign-on with all the other modern stuff. Why don't I have it with you? And so that's a product strategy thing. That's like the company has to decide that this is important, probably a platform thing. They need to all start using it. And, so that's good leadership leading the company where they need to be. On the other hand, let's say you've got a dozen product teams. You have a very good team topology. Let's say it's very effective. And at a dozen, you should. At 100, it's much harder than 12. But let's say you've got a good one. In your product strategy, remember your product vision is where you're trying to go. The product strategy identifies the most critical problems to solve. You may have a really critical problem. Like, let's say at this hypothetical growth stage company with 12 product teams, our biggest issue is retention, churn, too many customers leaving. We probably want multiple teams working on that same problem because in our dream world, all of them make a real impact and we really get this straightened out. But in the real world, not our dream world, maybe one of them actually makes enough progress that we're not losing money on every customer.
This is absolutely wonderful, Maria. It's one of those topics many people just glaze over or minimize to an org structure change, but you've kind of laid out really the foundations for what it means, the impact of having a good one, the costs of not having one. If you were talking to any product leader listening to this, what is something they can do tomorrow, either to evaluate their team topology or improve it?
Well, at a minimum, I would suggest the product leader go have lunch with the technology leader and talk about where you are together on this and what you think you can do to move forward.
It's probably 80% of the battle in so many companies is there's kind of this engineering team versus product management team. And, I'm going to assign it. And it's almost, I love that point. It's probably the biggest impact is to the extent that there's one product team and your head of product and engineering are evaluating this. As always, Marty, such a gift to have you on the show. Great conversation on topology. I look forward to our upcoming conversations.
Thank you, Christian.
Want to learn more? Until next time, please check out svpg.com. Sign up for our newsletter that Marty Cagan puts out. Join us for one of our workshops near you and get access to all of the articles and content we put out. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Until next time, have a good day.
A quick disclaimer, while this podcast is named Product Therapy, it is not hosted by licensed therapists or mental health professionals, and it is in no way a substitute for professional mental health services. We recognize the importance of mental well-being and encourage anyone facing personal difficulties to seek support from qualified professionals. See www.findahelpline.com.